The blood from Rose Thompson's lip dripped onto the wooden floorboards of the cramped bedroom as her brother Randall loomed over her, his chest heaving with rage. It was 1879 in Madisonville, Texas, and the setting sun cast long shadows through the window, illuminating the fury in his eyes. "You've shamed this family for the last time," he snarled, flexing his fingers as Rose cowered against the wall. "Father left me in charge when he died, and I won't have you running wild, getting yourself talked about by every gossip in town." Rose touched her fingers to her swollen lip. At 20 years old, she had endured her brother's increasing control since their parents' death 2 years prior, but never had his anger erupted so violently, all because she'd been seen talking to the blacksmith's son after church. "I was only being friendly," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Friendly?" Randall scoffed, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "You were laughing, touching his arm, the whole town saw it. Everyone knows what happened to our sister Alina when she got too friendly with a man." He spat the words, ran off, disgraced herself. "I won't have another Thompson girl ruining our name." Rose's mind flashed to her older sister who'd fled Madisonville 3 years ago. No one spoke of Alina anymore. It was as if she'd never existed. "I'm going to the Wilsons' dinner party tomorrow," Randall continued, straightening his vest. "You're to stay here and reflect on your behavior. No meals until I return. Perhaps hunger will remind you of your place." When he left, slamming the door behind him, Rose slumped to the floor. The house that had once been filled with her parents' love had become a prison. She crawled to the small mirror above her dresser and examined her face, the swollen lip, the darkening bruise on her cheekbone. Tomorrow it would be worse. Tears welled in her eyes as she made a decision. She wouldn't endure this anymore. Alina had escaped, and now Rose would too. Under the cover of darkness, she packed a small bag with her mother's locket, a spare dress, and the meager savings she'd hidden beneath a loose floorboard. She slipped out the back door and made her way toward the stables at the edge of town. Planning to borrow one of Jeb Wilson's horses, she'd return it somehow, someday. The night air was cool against her bruised face as she crept through the sleeping town. Madisonville was small enough that everyone knew everyone's business, but large enough that a woman alone at night had reason to be afraid. Rose kept to the shadows, her heart pounding against her ribs. When she reached the stables, a voice from the darkness nearly stopped her heart. "Kind of late for a lady to be out wanderin', isn't it?" Rose spun around, clutching her bag to her chest. A tall figure emerged from beside the livery, the ember of a cigarette glowing in the darkness. As he stepped into a shaft of moonlight, she saw a man with broad shoulders, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. "I'm not wandering," she said, lifting her chin despite her fear. "I'm leaving." The man stepped closer and Rose instinctively backed away. When the moonlight caught his face, she saw he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes that seemed to see right through her pretense of bravery. "Leaving?" he questioned, then his gaze fell on her bruised face. His expression hardened. "Who did that to you, miss?" Rose turned away. "It doesn't matter." "I reckon it matters plenty." He dropped his cigarette and crushed it beneath his boot. "Name's Matthew Dawson. Most folks call me Matt." "I didn't ask," Rose replied, trying to edge around him toward the stable door. "You're taking one of Wilson's horses," he observed, not a question but a statement. Rose froze. "Are you going to stop me?" Matt studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, madam, but that paint mare has a bad shoe. You take her, you'll be stranded before sunrise." He gestured toward the stable. "The bay gelding in the last stall is sounder, better for distance." Rose blinked in surprise. "Why would you help me?" "Because whoever gave you those marks isn't someone you should be staying with," he said simply. "I've got my own horse and was headed north at first light. Could use some company on the trail if you're willing." "I don't know you," Rose pointed out. "True enough. And I don't know what you're running from, except it left its signature on your face." Matt's voice was gentle but firm. "Where are you planning to go, miss?" "Thompson, Rose Thompson." She hesitated, then admitted, "I don't know where I'm going, just away from here." "That's not much of a plan," Matt said, but there was no mockery in his tone. "It's all I have," Rose replied, her voice breaking slightly. Matt was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm heading to my brother's ranch near Fort Worth. You'd be welcome to travel with me that far, safer than riding alone." Rose studied him, trying to gauge his intentions. Everything she'd been taught warned against trusting strange men, but something in his straightforward manner reassured her. And the painful truth was, she had few options. "Why help me? You don't even know me." "My ma raised me to believe a man who stands by while someone suffers is no man at all," Matt said, his voice low. "I've got a sister about your age. Wouldn't want her traveling alone if she was in trouble." Before Rose could respond, they heard voices approaching the night watchman making his rounds with someone else. Matt quickly pulled Rose into the shadows beside the stable. "Wilson's got that new stallion," the watchman was saying. "Randall Thompson's been asking about buying it." Rose stiffened at her brother's name. Matt's hand found her arm, steadying her. "That Thompson fellow gives me a chill," the other voice replied. "Did you hear how he knocked around his sister? Reverend's wife saw her at church with a split lip last month, said it wasn't the first time either." The voices faded as the men continued their patrol, but Rose remained frozen, shame washing over her that the town knew how Randall treated her. "Your brother?" Matt asked quietly. Rose nodded, unable to speak. "Then we'd best be quick," he said decisively. "If we ride now, we'll have hours before anyone notices you're gone." He moved with efficient purpose, saddling 2 horses, a sturdy chestnut for himself and the bay gelding he'd mentioned for Rose. He helped her mount, his hands respectful but sure. As they rode quietly out of town under the vast Texas sky scattered with stars, Rose felt fear and hope battling within her chest. She was leaving everything she knew, riding into the unknown with a stranger. But for the first time in years, she was making her own choice. They rode through the night, stopping only when the horses needed rest. When dawn broke, they were miles from Madisonville. Matt found a small creek where they could water the horses and rest for a while. Rose sat on a fallen log, watching as Matt built a small fire and produced coffee and hardtack from his saddlebags. "It's not much of a breakfast," he apologized, handing her a tin cup of the strong black coffee. "It's more than I'd have gotten at home," Rose said quietly. In the morning light, Matt could better see the extent of her injuries, the purple bruising on her cheekbone, the split lip, and when her sleeve slipped back, the finger-shaped bruises on her wrist. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Rose caught his gaze and turned away, tugging her sleeve down. "I don't need your pity." "That's not pity, madam, that's anger. No man has the right to mark a woman that way. He's my brother. He says it's his responsibility to keep me in line since our parents died." The words came out mechanically, as if she'd heard them so often she'd started to believe them. Matt's voice was quiet but firm. "Family doesn't leave scars, Miss Thompson." Those simple words hit Rose with unexpected force. She'd been taught that family loyalty was everything, that she should endure whatever came her way for the sake of the Thompson name. But as she looked at the bruises on her wrist, she knew Matt was right. "Where did you come from, Mr. Dawson?" she asked, changing the subject. "You're not from Madisonville?" "All over," he replied, pouring himself more coffee. "Born in Missouri, but I've been drifting since the war, worked cattle drives, did some scouting for the Army. Last few years I've been helping my brother build his ranch. And now you're returning there." Matt nodded. "My brother Daniel's a good man. Built something from nothing. I go where I'm needed, but I always circle back to help him." Rose studied him, noting the way he sat alert even while appearing relaxed, the weathered quality of his skin that spoke of years outdoors, the calluses on his hands. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way the town girls giggled about, but there was something compelling about his face, a steadiness, a quiet confidence. "You should rest," he told her, interrupting her thoughts. "We've got a long ride ahead and you didn't sleep last night." Rose wanted to protest, but exhaustion was overtaking her. She curled up on a blanket Matt offered, and despite her intention to merely rest her eyes, she fell into a deep sleep. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky. Matt was tending to the horses, his movements efficient and gentle with the animals. "I'm sorry," she said, scrambling to her feet. "I didn't mean to sleep so long." "You needed it," he said simply. "We should move on, though. Your brother will have noticed you're missing by now." The mention of Randall sent a spike of fear through Rose. "He'll come after me. He won't let me leave." "Let me worry about that," Matt said, helping her gather her few belongings. "We've got a good head start, and I know trails he won't." They rode steadily throughout the day, Matt setting a pace that would cover distance without exhausting the horses. He seemed to have an innate sense of the land, choosing paths Rose would never have noticed, avoiding the main roads where they might be spotted. As they rode, Rose found herself telling Matt about her life, her happy childhood in the Thompson house, how everything changed after her mother died of influenza and her father from a heart attack soon after. How Randall, at 26, had taken control of everything, including her life. "He wasn't always this way," she found herself explaining as they rode side by side across a rolling meadow. "After Alina, our older sister, ran away with a traveling salesman, something changed in Randall. Father was heartbroken, and Randall seemed to think it was his duty to make sure I didn't follow Alina's path. So he beats you to keep you virtuous." Matt's voice was tight with controlled anger. He says he's protecting the family honor. Even to her own ears, the excuse sounded hollow now. Matt's response was quiet but firm. "There's no honor in cruelty, Rose." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her. No one had spoken to her with such simple respect in years. That night they made camp in a small copse of trees. Matt built a fire and produced dried beef and beans from his provisions. After they ate, Rose insisted on cleaning up, glad to have something useful to do. "You're good at this," she observed as Matt efficiently set up their small camp. "Living on the trail." "Had plenty of practice," he replied with a small smile. "During the war and after, you fought in the war?" Rose asked, suddenly realizing she didn't know how old he was. "Joined up in '63 when I was 17, Matt said, poking at the fire. "Lied about my age, saw the end of it at least." "You were on the Confederate side." Matt was quiet for a moment. "Yes, though I had mixed feelings even then, more so now." He looked up at her. "War has a way of making everything seem both clearer and more complicated at the same time." Rose nodded, though she couldn't truly understand. She'd been a child during the war, sheltered from its realities in their small Texas town. "What about you?" Matt asked. "What did you do before?" "Before I ran away," Rose finished when he trailed off. "Nothing remarkable, kept house for Randall, attended church, did my needlework." She looked into the fire. "Randall wouldn't let me take a position as a teacher at the school, though I wanted to. Said it wasn't fitting for a Thompson woman to work for wages." "What would you do if you could choose?" Matt asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. The question startled Rose. No one had asked her that in years. "I don't know," she admitted. "I used to dream of having my own little home, maybe teaching children, something quiet but useful." She laughed softly. "It sounds so small saying it aloud." "It doesn't sound small to me," Matt said. "Sounds like something worth wanting." His words lingered in her mind as she settled onto her bedroll that night, staring up at the stars. For the first time in years, Rose allowed herself to imagine a future that was her own choosing. Dawn brought a tense vigilance to Matt. He seemed to be constantly scanning their surroundings, alert to every sound. They packed up quickly and set off, keeping to less traveled paths. "You think he's following us?" Rose asked as they paused to water the horses at midday. "I think we should assume he is," Matt replied. "Your brother strikes me as a man who doesn't like losing what he considers his property." The blunt assessment made Rose wince, but she couldn't deny its truth. "What will we do if he catches up?" Matt's hand briefly touched the revolver at his hip. "Let's make sure he doesn't." They pushed harder that day, the terrain gradually changing as they moved northwest toward Fort Worth. The open plains gave way to more varied landscapes with scattered woodlands and rolling hills. By evening, Rose's body ached from the long hours in the saddle, but she didn't complain. As Matt prepared their simple meal, Rose caught him looking at her bruised face with a frown. "They're fading," she said, self-consciously touching her cheek. "They shouldn't have been there in the first place," Matt replied, his voice low and controlled. "No," Rose agreed, finding new resolve in her voice. "They shouldn't." That night, as they sat by the fire, Matt seemed more talkative than before, telling her stories of his travels across the Western Territories. "My brother's ranch isn't grand," he told her. "But it's good land with clear water. He's building something that will last." "It sounds wonderful," Rose said, trying to picture it. "You'll have choices when we get there," Matt said carefully. "Daniel and his wife Sarah are good people. They'd let you stay until you decide what you want to do next. Fort Worth is growing. There might be teaching positions or other work if that's what you want." The consideration in his words touched Rose deeply. No one had spoken of her wants or choices in so long. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express the fullness of her gratitude. Matt nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared understanding. Then he stood and announced it was time to get some rest. Rose lay awake longer than usual that night, thinking about Matt Dawson and the unexpected turn her life had taken. She'd fled in desperation, with no real plan beyond escape. Now, barely 3 days later, she was beginning to see possibilities she hadn't dared imagine before. The fourth day of their journey dawned clear and cool. They made good progress through the morning, but as they stopped to rest the horses around midday, both froze at the sound of riders approaching. "Quick," Matt whispered urgently, helping Rose into the cover of a dense thicket of brush and trees. He led the horses deeper into the cover and returned to crouch beside her, his hand on his gun. 3 riders passed along the trail they just left, moving at a determined pace. Rose's heart nearly stopped when she recognized her brother's rigid posture on the lead horse. "Randall," she breathed, instinctively shrinking back. Matt's hand found hers and squeezed gently. They remained motionless until the sounds of the horses had faded completely. "They're heading in the wrong direction," Matt said quietly. "But they'll figure that out eventually. We need to change our route." They set off again, Matt leading them on a more circuitous path that took them through rougher terrain but kept them away from the main trails. Rose could see the tension in his shoulders as he constantly scanned their surroundings. Late that afternoon, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. "Storm's coming," Matt observed grimly. "We need to find shelter." They pushed the horses harder, and just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, Matt spotted an abandoned line shack tucked against a hillside. It was little more than a one-room cabin with a sagging roof, but it would keep them dry. They hurried the horses into the small lean-to attached to the cabin and then rushed inside as the skies opened up. The interior was dusty but intact, with a small stone fireplace, a rough wooden table, and a narrow cot in one corner. Matt quickly got a fire going while Rose shook out her damp shawl. Outside, lightning flashed, followed by a tremendous crash of thunder that made her jump. "Looks like we'll be staying here tonight," Matt said, adding more wood to the growing flames. "Storm this heavy will wash out our tracks." "Might be a blessing in disguise." Rose nodded, trying to hide her nervousness at being confined in such close quarters with him. Matt seemed to sense her discomfort. "You take the cot," he said, already spreading his bedroll on the floor near the fire. "I'll be fine down here." "Thank you," she said, grateful for his consideration. As the storm raged outside, they shared the last of Matt's provisions: jerky, hard bread, and coffee. The flickering firelight cast dancing shadows on the walls of the small cabin, creating an intimate atmosphere that Rose found both comforting and unsettling. "Tomorrow we should reach a trading post where we can get more supplies," Matt told her. "We're about 2 days' ride from my brother's ranch." Rose nodded, suddenly aware that their journey was nearing its end. She'd been so focused on escaping Randall that she hadn't fully considered what would come after. "What will you do after you've delivered me safely to your brothers?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Matt looked up from the fire, his expression thoughtful. "I hadn't planned that far ahead. Usually I help Daniel with whatever needs doing, then move on when the restlessness hits me again." "You don't stay in one place long, not since the war," he admitted. "Always felt like I was looking for something, though I couldn't tell you what." Rose thought about that, about the kind of life he led, free but lonely, so different from her own confined existence. "What about you?" Matt asked. "What will you do once you're truly free of your brother?" The question caught Rose off guard. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "Everything's happened so fast. 3 days ago I was trapped in that house, believing I had no choices. And now," Rose looked into the fire, considering, "now I think maybe I have too many choices. It's overwhelming." "You've got time," Matt assured her. "No need to decide everything tonight." A particularly loud crack of thunder made Rose startle, and Matt noticed. "Never liked storms much myself," he offered. "My brother used to tell me it was just the angels bowling up in heaven, but I never found that very comforting." The image made Rose smile despite her nerves. "My mother used to say it was God rearranging his furniture." They shared a quiet laugh, and Rose felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. They talked late into the night as the storm continued to rage outside, about their childhoods, about books they'd read, about places Matt had seen in his travels. It was the most normal conversation Rose had enjoyed in years. When she finally lay down on the narrow cot, exhaustion overtook her quickly. The last thing she remembered was the comforting sight of Matt sitting by the fire, his watchful presence keeping her safe. She woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Matt was already up, brewing coffee over the rekindled fire. "Storm's past," he said, handing her a cup. "But it's left the ground muddy. We'll need to take it slower today." They set out after a simple breakfast, the world around them washed clean by the rain. The air felt fresh and full of promise, and Rose found herself smiling as they rode through meadows brilliant with wildflowers brought to life by the storm. "You look different today," Matt observed as they rode side by side along a stream. "Do I?" Rose touched her face self-consciously. "Not the bruises," Matt clarified. "Though they're fading, it's something in your eyes. You look lighter." Rose considered this. "I feel lighter," she admitted. "For the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe." Matt smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Freedom suits you, Rose Thompson." The way he said her name sent a warm flutter through her chest. She was becoming increasingly aware of Matt as more than just her rescuer, the strong lines of his profile, the gentleness of his hands with the horses, the thoughtfulness in his questions. It was confusing and thrilling all at once. They reached the trading post by mid-afternoon. It was little more than a collection of rough buildings where trails intersected, but it offered the supplies they needed and news of the outside world. As Matt went to purchase provisions, Rose waited with the horses, conscious of curious glances from the few people around the post. A woman alone, traveling with a man who wasn't her husband or brother, was bound to raise eyebrows. "Miss, you all right?" Rose turned to find an older woman watching her with concern, her eyes lingering on the fading bruises. "Yes, thank you," Rose replied politely. The woman's gaze shifted to where Matt was emerging from the trading post, arms full of supplies. "That man treating you proper?" "Mr. Dawson has been a perfect gentleman," Rose assured her, touched by the stranger's concern. "He's helping me reach his brother's ranch near Fort Worth." The woman seemed to relax slightly. "Good, just checking. We look out for each other out here." With a nod, she moved on, leaving Rose with a warm feeling of solidarity. Matt returned, securing their supplies to the horses. "All set." "We should move on. I'd rather not linger where people might remember us." As they rode away from the trading post, Rose told him about the woman's concern. "She thought I might be in trouble," Rose explained. "Because of the bruises." Matt's expression darkened. "At least she asked." Too many people see and say nothing. Like in Madisonville, Rose said quietly. Everyone knew what Randall was doing, no one ever helped. That's changing slowly, Matt said, but not fast enough. They rode in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Rose found herself stealing glances at Matt, wondering about this quiet, principled man who had risked himself to help a stranger. That evening, they camped by a small pond. After they'd eaten, Matt surprised her by producing a small bar of lavender soap from their newly purchased supplies. "Thought you might appreciate this," he said, handing it to her. "There's clean water here." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought unexpected tears to Rose's eyes. "Thank you," she said, clutching the simple bar of soap like a precious gift. Matt tactfully took himself and the horses to the other side of the pond, giving her privacy to wash. The feel of clean water on her skin and the scent of lavender felt impossibly luxurious after days on the trail. When she returned to camp, hair damp and spirits lifted, Matt had the fire built high and a fresh pot of coffee waiting. He'd even spread her bedroll in the best spot near the fire. "Your turn," she told him, gesturing toward the pond. "The water's lovely." When he returned, his hair wet and his face freshly shaved, Rose was struck anew by how handsome he was beneath the trail dust and stubble. He settled across the fire from her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. "Tell me about your brother's ranch," Rose said finally, breaking the silence that had grown charged with unexpected awareness. Matt seemed grateful for the topic. "It's in good country with water and grass. Daniel's built a proper house now, not just a cabin. He and Sarah have 2 little ones, Emma's 4 and Michael's just turned 2. "They sound lovely," Rose said, smiling at the fondness in his voice when he spoke of his niece and nephew. "They are. Daniel's made something real there, something lasting." There was a note of wistfulness in Matt's voice. "You sound like you admire him," Rose observed. "I do," Matt admitted. "He knows what he wants and he's building it day by day. Me, I've just been drifting, helping out here and there." "There's value in that too," Rose said gently. "In being free to go where you're needed." Matt looked at her thoughtfully. "Maybe, but lately I've been wondering if there might be something to putting down roots." Their eyes met across the fire, and Rose felt her heartbeat quicken at something she saw in his gaze. But the moment passed when a distant coyote howled, drawing Matt's attention back to their surroundings. "We should get some sleep," he said, his voice slightly rough. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Rose nodded, suddenly shy as she retreated to her bedroll. As she drifted off to sleep, she found herself thinking about Matt's words about putting down roots and wondering if her own future might somehow be intertwined with his. Next day brought them closer to Fort Worth. The landscape was changing, with more settled areas and occasional homesteads visible in the distance. Matt seemed more relaxed as they entered familiar territory, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his previous travels through the area. "My brother's ranch is beyond those hills," he told her as they paused to rest the horses in the late afternoon. "We could push on and reach it by nightfall, or camp one more night and arrive fresh in the morning." Rose hesitated, suddenly nervous about meeting his family and facing whatever came next. "Perhaps it would be better to arrive in the morning," she suggested. "I'd like to look somewhat presentable when I meet your brother and his wife." Matt nodded, understanding in his eyes. One more night on the trail it is. They made camp early, in a sheltered grove of trees beside a clear stream. As Rose helped gather wood for the fire, she realized with a pang that this would be their last night alone together. Tomorrow, everything would change. The thought made her oddly melancholy. Despite the circumstances of their meeting and the constant threat of Randall's pursuit, these days with Matt had awakened something in her, a sense of possibility, of connection she hadn't felt in years. As they sat by the fire after their simple meal, Rose gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Matt," she began hesitantly, "when we reach your brother's ranch tomorrow, what happens then?" He looked up, his eyes reflecting the firelight. That depends on what you want, Rose. I'm not sure what I want, she admitted. Everything's changed so quickly. You'll have choices, he assured her. Daniel and Sarah will welcome you for as long as you need. Fort Worth is growing, there are opportunities there. Or you could go further to Dallas or even beyond Texas altogether. Rose nodded, trying to imagine these possibilities. And what about you? Will you stay at your brother's for a while? Matt was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire. I've been thinking about that, he said finally. I've been drifting a long time, maybe too long. Because of the war, Rose asked gently, partly, he acknowledged. Saw things that made it hard to settle afterwards, and there was a girl back in Missouri. He gave a rueful smile. She married someone else while I was gone. Can't blame her, I was just a boy when I left, and the man who came back wasn't the same. I'm sorry, Rose said softly. Matt shrugged. It was a long time ago, but I think maybe I've been using that as an excuse to keep moving, to not risk putting down roots again. And now? He looked at her directly then, his gaze steady and warm. Now I'm wondering if maybe it's time to stop running. The intensity in his eyes made Rose's breath catch. She looked down, suddenly afraid of the emotions welling up inside her. I should check on the horses, Matt said abruptly, standing up. When he returned, the moment had passed, and they spoke of practical matters, the route they would take in the morning, what to expect at his brother's ranch. But underneath, their conversation ran a current of unspoken feelings, growing stronger with each passing hour. That night, as Rose lay in her bedroll looking up at the stars, she allowed herself to acknowledge what her heart already knew: she was falling in love with Matthew Dawson. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had fled one situation only to find her heart entangled in another, with a man whose future plans were as uncertain as her own. Morning came with clear skies and a sense of anticipation. They packed up camp efficiently, the routine familiar after days on the trail together. As they mounted up for the final leg of their journey, Rose felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Nervous? Matt asked, noticing her silence as they rode. A little, she admitted. I've never done anything like this before, arriving at strangers' home with no introduction, no invitation. They're good people, Matt assured her, and they know something about starting over. Daniel came back from the war with nothing but determination. Sarah was a widow with no family left. They built something together. His words reassured her, and as they crested a hill around mid-morning, Rose got her first glimpse of the Dawson ranch. It wasn't as large as some she'd seen, but it was neat and well kept, with a 2-story farmhouse painted white, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. Fields of wheat stretched to the east, and cattle grazed in pastures to the north. It's beautiful, Rose said sincerely. Matt smiled with evident pride. Daniel's worked hard for it, come on. As they approached the house, a woman came out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the sun. When she recognized Matt, her face lit up with a wide smile. Daniel, she called over her shoulder. Matt's home. A tall man emerged from the barn, and a moment later 2 small children came running from around the side of the house, their excited voices carrying across the yard. Uncle Matt, Uncle Matt. Matt dismounted quickly, scooping up the little girl who reached him first and swinging her in a circle that made her squeal with delight. The younger child, a sturdy boy with his uncle's dark hair, clung to Matt's leg the moment he was set down. Rose watched from horseback, suddenly feeling like an intruder on this family reunion. But then Matt turned, still holding the boy, and extended his hand to help her dismount. Rose, this is my family, he said with a warmth she'd never heard in his voice before. Daniel and Sarah, and these little rascals are Emma and Michael. Daniel Dawson stepped forward, his resemblance to his younger brother striking despite the lines of responsibility etched into his face. Welcome to our home, Miss Thompson. Sarah, a pretty woman with kind eyes, came forward and took Rose's hands in her own. Any friend of Matt's is welcome here, she said warmly. Then her gaze fell on the fading bruises on Rose's face, and understanding flickered in her eyes. Come inside. You must be exhausted from your journey." The farmhouse was simple but comfortable, filled with evidence of a happy family life, children's toys tucked in corners, handmade quilts on the furniture, the scent of baking bread in the air. Sarah showed Rose to a small bedroom upstairs where she could freshen up and rest. "It was my sewing room," Sarah explained, "but it will serve as your bedroom for as long as you need it." "You're very kind," Rose said, overwhelmed by the family's immediate acceptance. "I don't want to impose." "Nonsense," Sarah interrupted gently. "Matt's letter explained enough for us to understand you needed a safe place. That's what we can offer here." "Letter?" Rose asked, confused. Sarah looked surprised. "Yes, the letter that arrived 2 days ago. Matt sent it from the trading post, explaining you were coming and a little about your situation." Rose felt a rush of emotion at the realization that Matt had planned so carefully for her arrival, ensuring his family would be prepared to welcome her. "Rest now," Sarah suggested. "We'll have plenty of time to talk later." Left alone, Rose sank onto the narrow bed, emotions washing over her. Relief at reaching safety, gratitude for the Dawsons' kindness, and a growing awareness that her feelings for Matt had become something she could no longer ignore. She washed and changed into her cleanest dress, then joined the family downstairs. The children had been put down for afternoon naps, and the adults sat around the kitchen table, where Matt was relating a carefully edited version of their journey. "Randall Thompson's well known in these parts and not favorably," Daniel commented. "He's got business dealings in Fort Worth, but most folks keep their distance. He's known for driving hard bargains and holding grudges." Rose's heart sank at this news. "So he could find me here." "It's possible," Daniel acknowledged, "but you're not alone anymore. This is our land and we protect our own." The simple inclusion in our own brought tears to Rose's eyes. Matt's hand found hers under the table and squeezed gently. The days that followed took on a rhythm that Rose found deeply comforting. She helped Sarah with household tasks and the children, grateful to make herself useful. Daniel and Matt worked the ranch, coming in for meals with stories of the day's activities. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sometimes Matt would play his harmonica, simple tunes that made the children dance and brought a peaceful smile to Rose's face. A week passed, then 2. Rose's bruises faded completely, and with them, some of the fear that had been her constant companion for so long. The nightmares that had plagued her first few nights in the farmhouse grew less frequent. She began to venture out more, riding with Matt to check fence lines or bring lunch to Daniel and the ranch hands in distant fields. On these rides, they talked easily about everything and nothing, books they'd read, memories of childhood, hopes for the future. Sarah mentioned there's a need for a teacher at the school in town, Rose told Matt as they rode back to the ranch one afternoon. "I've been thinking about applying." Matt smiled. "You'd make a wonderful teacher." "You think so?" Rose asked, pleased by his confidence in her. "I've seen you with Emma and Michael. You have a way of explaining things that makes them want to learn." His words warmed her. "I always wanted to teach. Randall wouldn't hear of it, said it wasn't proper for a Thompson woman to work for wages." "What Randall thinks doesn't matter anymore," Matt reminded her gently. "This is your life now." Rose nodded, still getting used to the idea of making her own decisions. "What about you?" she asked. "Will you stay here at the ranch?" It was a question she'd wanted to ask for days. Matt had been at the ranch longer than his usual visits, according to comments Sarah had made, yet he'd said nothing about his plans. "For now," he said, his eyes on the horizon. "Daniel can use the help with the harvest coming. And after." Matt turned to look at her then, something unreadable in his expression. "That depends," he said quietly. Before Rose could ask what he meant, they crested a hill and saw a cloud of dust on the road ahead, riders approaching the ranch. Matt's hand went instinctively to his gun. "Get behind me," he ordered, suddenly alert. Rose's heart hammered in her chest as the riders came into view. 3 men, one in the lead on a horse she recognized immediately, Randall, she whispered, fear flooding back in an instant. Matt's expression hardened. Ride back to the ranch. Get Daniel. I won't leave you alone, Rose. His voice was firm. I need to know you're safe, please. The intensity in his eyes convinced her. She turned her horse and galloped toward the ranch, looking back once to see Matt positioning himself in the middle of the road, waiting for the approaching riders. When she reached the ranch, she shouted for Daniel, who emerged from the barn with 2 ranch hands. Rose quickly explained the situation and Daniel grabbed his rifle. Stay here with Sarah and the children, he instructed her, then mounted his horse and rode off with his men toward where she had left Matt. Rose paced the porch anxiously, every minute feeling like an hour. Sarah brought her a cup of tea she couldn't drink, and the children sensed the tension, becoming unusually quiet. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, she saw riders approaching. As they drew closer, she could make out Matt and Daniel, along with the ranch hands. There was no sign of Randall or his men. Rose ran down the porch steps as they dismounted. What happened? Where's Randall? Gone, Matt said grimly. For now, Daniel explained as they walked toward the house. We made it clear that Rose is under our protection now. Randall didn't take it well, but he's not fool enough to start trouble on our land, outnumbered as he was. He said he'd be back, Matt added. With the sheriff. Let him try, Daniel said confidently. Sheriff Jenkins is no friend of Randall Thompson. And Rose is a grown woman, free to live where she chooses. Despite their reassurances, Rose felt the shadow of fear returning. I've brought trouble to your home, she said miserably. Perhaps I should move on, go further west. No, Matt's response was immediate and firm. He took her hands in his. Rose, running isn't the answer. You have the right to build a life where you choose. His touch steadied her as it had so many times during their journey. Looking into his eyes, Rose found the courage she needed. You're right, she said. I'm tired of running. That evening, after the children were asleep, the adults sat around the kitchen table discussing what to do. Daniel suggested that Rose formally apply for the teaching position in town, establishing herself as a respected member of the community. It would make it harder for Randall to claim any authority over you, he explained. And the school board is looking to fill the position before harvest time. I'll take you into town tomorrow to inquire, Sarah offered. The chairman of the school board is a friend. Rose nodded, grateful for their support. As the conversation continued, she became aware of Matt watching her, a thoughtful expression on his face. Later, when Sarah and Daniel had gone up to bed, Rose found herself alone with Matt on the porch. The night was cool, stars scattered across the vast Texas sky. Thank you, she said softly, for everything. Matt turned to look at her, his face half in shadow. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do, Rose insisted. You risked yourself for a stranger. You brought me to your family. You've given me a chance at a real life. You're the one who had the courage to leave, Matt pointed out. I just happened to be there when you needed help. It was more than that, Rose said, gathering her courage. You really saw me when I'd been invisible for so long. Matt was silent for a moment, then said, I've been thinking about what you asked earlier, about whether I'm staying. Rose held her breath, suddenly afraid of his answer. I've been drifting a long time, Matt continued, his voice low and thoughtful. Never found a reason compelling enough to stop. Until now. He turned to face her fully, and in the moonlight, Rose could see the emotion in his eyes. I'm falling in love with you, Rose Thompson. I think I started falling that first night when you had the courage to leave everything behind for a chance at freedom. The words sent a wave of joy through Rose so intense it almost hurt. Matt, she whispered, unable to say more. He took her hand gently. I know it's too soon. You're just starting to build your own life, and the last thing you need is. Rose stopped his words by placing her fingers lightly against his lips. It's not too soon, she said softly. I've been alone in a house full of fear for years. These past weeks with you and your family have shown me what real family means, what love can be. Matt's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch infinitely gentle. Family doesn't leave scars, he murmured. echoing the words he'd said to her by the creek all those days ago. "No," Rose agreed, leaning into his touch. "Family heals them." When Matt kissed her, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. It was nothing like the forced, awkward kisses she'd endured from the suitors Randall had approved. This was a meeting of equals, a promise of partnership. When they finally pulled apart, Matt rested his forehead against hers. "I don't have much to offer you," he said. "Not like this ranch Daniel's built." "I don't need much," Rose told him. "Just a life that's my own choosing, with someone who sees me as I really am." The next morning, Rose rode into town with Sarah to inquire about the teaching position. The chairman of the school board, impressed by Rose's education and gentle manner, offered her the job on the spot to begin after the harvest. As they rode back to the ranch, Rose could barely contain her excitement. "I can't believe it happened so quickly," she told Sarah. "I'll have my own income, my own place in the community." Sarah smiled knowingly. "And will you be staying with us, or are you and Matt making other plans?" Rose blushed, realizing that her feelings for Matt must have been obvious to his perceptive sister-in-law. "We've only just begun to talk about the future," she admitted. "Everything's happening so fast." "When it's right, you know it," Sarah said simply. "Daniel and I married 6 weeks after we met. When you find someone who makes you feel safe enough to be truly yourself, you don't need to wait for the world's approval." Rose thought about Sarah's words as they rode, about the difference between the controlling fear Randall had instilled in her and the protective love Matt showed, love that gave her wings instead of clipping them. When they returned to the ranch, Matt was waiting on the porch. One look at Rose's face told him the news was good. "They offered me the position," she told him, excitement bubbling in her voice. "I start after harvest." Matt's smile was brilliant. "I knew they would. Congratulations, Miss Thompson." That evening, after dinner, Matt suggested a walk. They strolled hand in hand under the stars, eventually stopping by a small creek that ran through the Dawson property. "I've been thinking," Matt said, turning to face her. "About us, about the future." Rose's heart quickened. "So have I." "There's land available not far from here," he continued. "Good land with water. Not as much as Daniel has, but enough to start something. I've saved most of what I've earned over the years." Rose looked at him in wonder. "You want to build a ranch. I want to build a home," Matt corrected gently. "With you, if you'll have me." "It wouldn't be much at first, probably just a cabin to start, and you'd still be able to teach in town." Joy surged through Rose. "Are you asking me to marry you, Matthew Dawson?" In answer, Matt reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. "I know it's fast," he said, a touch of nervousness in his voice. "And I'd understand if you wanted to wait, to be on your own for a while." "Yes," Rose interrupted, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. As Matt pulled her into his arms, Rose felt the last shadows of her old life falling away, replaced by the warmth of true belonging. The weeks that followed were filled with plans and preparations. Word came that Randall had indeed gone to the sheriff, who had listened politely and then informed him that his adult sister was free to live where she chose. Rose wrote a letter to her brother, explaining her decision to build a new life and asking him to respect her choice. Whether he would was uncertain, but the act of writing the letter was liberating. Matt purchased the land he'd spoken of, and together they rode out to see it, rolling grassland with a creek running through it, a stand of oak trees that would provide shade for a house, and views of distant hills to the west. "It's perfect," Rose said, picturing the home they would build there. In early October, with the harvest complete and the first hints of autumn in the air, Rose Thompson and Matthew Dawson were married in the small church in town. Sarah had helped Rose make a simple white dress, and the church was filled with well-wishers, Daniel and his family, ranch hands, townspeople who had come to know and respect the new teacher, and even the sheriff, whose presence sent a clear message about where the community's support lay. There was no sign of Randall, though Rose had sent him an invitation. She felt a pang of sadness for the brother she had once loved, but no regret for the path she had chosen. After the ceremony, they celebrated at the Dawson Ranch with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. When the party finally wound down, Matt led Rose to a wagon packed with their belongings. "Daniel and Sarah wanted us to stay tonight," he explained, "but I thought you might prefer to begin our life together in our own home." "But the cabin isn't finished yet," Rose said, confused. Matt smiled mysteriously. "There have been some developments while you were busy with school preparations." He drove the wagon to their land, where Rose gasped in surprise. In the moonlight, she could see not the rough cabin she had expected, but a proper small house, with a covered porch and glass windows that gleamed in the starlight. "How?" she breathed as Matt helped her down from the wagon. "Everyone helped," he explained. "Daniel, the ranch hands, folks from town. It's a tradition out here, a house raising for newlyweds." Inside, Rose found a home already furnished with the basics: a stove, a table and chairs, a bed with a colorful quilt that she recognized as Sarah's handiwork. There were even curtains at the windows and a vase of late wildflowers on the table. "It's beautiful," she whispered, overcome with emotion. "It's just a beginning," Matt said, taking her in his arms. "We'll build it together day by day." As he kissed her, Rose knew with absolute certainty that she had found what she had always longed for: not just freedom from fear, but a love built on respect and partnership, a true family that healed rather than hurt. Winter came to their small ranch, bringing cozy evenings by the fire and the joy of creating their first Christmas traditions together. Rose thrived as a teacher, earning the respect of parents and the affection of her students. Matt worked their land and helped Daniel with the larger ranch operations, coming home each evening to share stories of his day with Rose. In the spring, they planted their first crops and added a small orchard. Rose started a garden, using seeds Sarah had saved for her. They added a few cattle and horses, building slowly but steadily. One evening in late April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Rose shared her news. "The doctor confirmed it today," she said, taking Matt's hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby around Thanksgiving." The joy that spread across Matt's face was everything Rose could have hoped for. He gathered her in his arms, his touch as gentle as always. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her face. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rose answered truthfully. "Sometimes I think about that night in Madisonville, how close I came to staying, to accepting that life as all I deserved." Matt's arms tightened around her. "You deserved so much more, you always did." In November, just as the first cold winds began to blow across the plains, Rose gave birth to a son they named James, after Matt's father. Sarah came to help during the first difficult weeks, her experience a blessing as Rose adjusted to motherhood. One afternoon, as Rose was nursing the baby, Sarah brought in the mail that Matt had collected from town. "There's a letter for you," she said, handing Rose an envelope. "From Madisonville?" Rose recognized Aliner's handwriting immediately. With trembling fingers, she opened the letter and read her sister's words of relief at learning Rose was safe, of regret for leaving without saying goodbye all those years ago, of her own journey to build a life in San Francisco with the husband Randall had deemed unsuitable. At the end of the letter was news that made Rose catch her breath. Randall had fallen ill with pneumonia and in his final days had expressed remorse for his treatment of his sisters. "He's gone, Rose," Aliner wrote. "Whatever demons drove him, I hope he's at peace now. And I hope someday we might see each other again, to rebuild what was lost." When Matt returned that evening, Rose shared the letter with him, her emotions a complex mixture of grief for the brother who might have been, relief that the threat he represented was gone, and hope for reconciliation with her sister. "Would you like to invite Aliner to visit?" Matt asked, cradling their son as they sat by the fire. "Yes," Rose said decisively. "I want her to meet James, to see the life we've built." As winter gave way to spring, their small ranch continued to flourish. Rose returned to teaching, bringing baby James with her in a basket that sat beside her desk. The students adored him, and Rose found that motherhood had deepened her understanding of the children in her care. In June, Alina arrived for a visit, bringing with her the sea breeze of San Francisco and stories of her life there with her merchant husband. The sisters spent long hours reconnecting, healing old wounds and building new memories. "You found true happiness," Alina observed one evening watching Rose and Matt together. "It shows in everything you do." "I have," Rose agreed. "It wasn't the life I imagined, but it's better than anything I could have dreamed." As the years passed, the Dawson ranch grew and prospered. They added on to the house as their family expanded to include a daughter, Catherine, born 2 years after James. Rose continued teaching until their third child was on the way, then dedicated herself to raising their children and helping Matt manage the increasingly successful ranch. Alina visited regularly, and they even made the journey to San Francisco once, a grand adventure that gave Rose a glimpse of a world beyond Texas. But always, she was eager to return to the home she and Matt had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matt surprised Rose with a special gift, a small schoolhouse built on their property, where she could teach their children and others from neighboring ranches who lived too far from town. "You've never lost that light in your eyes when you're teaching," he told her as he showed her the building, complete with desks and a blackboard. "I wanted you to have a place to share that gift." Rose's school became known throughout the region, drawing students from miles around. Their ranch became a gathering place for community celebrations, the Dawson hospitality as renowned as their fine horses and cattle. Through it all, the foundation of their life remained the love and respect they shared. Matt never raised his voice in anger, never raised a hand except in tenderness. The scars of Rose's past faded until they were nearly forgotten, replaced by the marks of a life well-lived. Laugh lines around her eyes, a small burn on her hand from teaching Catherine to bake, the silvery stretch marks from carrying their children. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching their children playing in the yard, James, now a lanky 10-year-old, Catherine a spirited 8-year-old, and little Thomas toddling after his siblings, Rose leaned her head against Matt's shoulder. "You ever think about that night we met?" she asked. "How different everything might have been if you hadn't been at those stables." Matt's arm tightened around her. "Every day," he said softly. "But I think maybe we were always meant to find each other. Some things are written in the stars." Rose smiled, thinking of the frightened young woman she had been and the journey that had led her here to this moment of perfect contentment. Family doesn't leave scars, Matt had told her that day by the creek, and he had been right. True family, the kind built on love and respect, leaves only the imprint of joy, the legacy of kindness, and the unshakable foundation of belonging. As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Rose Thompson Dawson knew with absolute certainty that she was home.